She walked away from the aircraft carrier in silence, her badge stripped, her career seemingly over. The admiral thought he'd rid himself of a troublesome mechanic who asked too many questions. But he never wondered why she accepted her dismissal with such calm defiance. 2 hours later, the radar operator's voice shook. "Sir, there's something massive surfacing off our port side." The ocean churned violently as an obsidian beast rose from the depths. When the submarine hatch opened, there she stood, commanding the Navy's most classified vessel. The admiral's radio crackled. "Stand down immediately. She has higher clearance than you. From which city in the world are you watching this video today?" If this story of hidden power and quiet dignity resonates with you, consider subscribing for more tales of extraordinary people in unexpected places. The morning sun crept over the horizon, painting the vast ocean in shades of gold and amber. Lieutenant Commander Zafira Van stood alone on the flight deck of the USS Liberty, her silhouette a solitary figure against the awakening sky. The massive aircraft carrier hummed beneath her feet. Over 90,000 tons of American naval power, preparing for another day at sea. She inhaled deeply, savoring the salt air before the deck would transform into a chaotic symphony of jets, personnel, and constant motion. Her calloused hands gripped the railing, betraying years of mechanical work despite her officer rank. Zephyra's eyes scanned the flight deck with practiced precision, noting minute details others would miss. The subtle asymmetry in the electromagnetic catapult housing, the barely perceptible vibration pattern from the portside generators, the way certain deck panels had been reinforced in patterns that suggested vulnerability rather than strength. "Early riser, Commander Van?" The voice startled her, though she didn't show it. Lieutenant Wesley Adair approached, coffee mug in hand, his uniform perfectly pressed despite the early hour. Young and ambitious, Adair was one of the few officers who treated her with genuine respect. "Best time to think clearly, Lieutenant," she replied, her voice carrying a calm assurance that seemed at odds with her position, as what most officers called the token mechanic. "Thinking about our upcoming deployment?" he asked, joining her at the railing. Zephyr's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "Thinking about weak points." Adair followed her gaze, trying to see what she saw. "You've got an engineer's eyes, always looking for what might break." "Everything breaks eventually, Lieutenant. The difference between disaster and routine is knowing where and when." She turned to him with the hint of a smile. "And having solutions ready." "Where did you train? Before the Liberty, I mean." His question was casual but probing. Zephyr's expression revealed nothing. "Here and there, started as a technician at Newport, worked my way up." The deflection was practiced, smooth, enough that most never noticed the lack of specifics. Adair nodded, accepting the vague answer, though his eyes reflected curiosity. "Well, whatever your background, you've certainly got skills that—" "The mechanics up with the birds, I see." Commander Thaddeus Rayburn's voice cut through their conversation, the slight emphasis on mechanic carrying unmistakable condescension. Zephyra straightened, her posture shifting subtly into perfect military bearing. "Commander Rayburn?" Rayburn was everything naval tradition celebrated. Annapolis graduate, third-generation officer, with a commanding presence and sharp intelligence. He was also, in Zafira's private assessment, dangerously confident in outdated security protocols. "Discussing technical matters with the junior officers again?" Rayburn asked, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I'm sure Lieutenant Adair has actual duties to prepare for." "Sir," Adair began, but Zafira's slight headshake silenced him. "Just admiring the sunrise, Commander," she replied, her tone neutral. "I'll be heading to breakfast now." She nodded respectfully to both men and walked away, feeling Rayburn's suspicious gaze following her across the deck. The carrier's mess hall buzzed with morning activity, hundreds of sailors and officers fueling up for their shifts. Zephyra collected her tray and found an empty spot at the end of a table, her isolation both deliberate and imposed. 6 months aboard the Liberty, and still most senior officers kept their distance. From across the room, she could see Commander Rayburn holding court with several other officers. His voice carried just enough to ensure she could hear him. 6 months, and I still don't understand how Van got this posting, he said, making no effort to lower his voice. Her file reads like it's been redacted by someone who doesn't know what redaction means. Laughter rippled through his audience. Admiral Hargrove, seated at a nearby table, glanced up briefly, his gaze meeting Zephyr's for a moment before returning to his breakfast. Maybe she's just good at her job, Lieutenant Adair suggested, joining Rayburn's table uninvited. Rayburn's expression soured. The hydraulic failure last month? Lucky guess. Any first-year engineer could have spotted that issue eventually. After how many casualties? Adair countered. She identified the problem before anyone else even noticed symptoms. She's been sticking her nose in every system on this carrier, asking questions beyond her clearance level, Rayburn said. That's not diligence, that's suspicious. He raised his voice slightly. Nothing wrong with being just a mechanic, Van. The problem is pretending to be something more. Zephyra continued eating, her face betraying nothing, though her mind cataloged every word, every reaction. The Admiral watching, but not intervening. The junior officers uncomfortable, but silent. The subtle shifting of allegiances and perceptions that would determine who would listen when it mattered. The ship's PA system crackled. Lieutenant Commander Van, report to Engineering Briefing Room 3. Lieutenant Commander Van to Engineering Briefing Room 3. She disposed of her tray and left without acknowledging Rayburn's comments, feeling the weight of evaluating gazes on her back. Perception was its own form of armor, she reminded herself. And sometimes being underestimated was the greatest tactical advantage. Engineering Briefing Room 3 was already crowded when Zephyra arrived. Department heads and senior technicians gathered around digital schematics of the carrier's defensive systems. Lieutenant Commander Santiago, head of electronic warfare, was midway through an assessment. Countermeasures are operating within expected parameters, though we're seeing some latency in the starboard arrays during multi-target scenarios, Santiago was saying. Zephyra studied the data scrolling across the main screen, noting patterns that triggered alarm bells in her mind. She waited for Santiago to finish before speaking. There's a vulnerability in the integration between the CIWS and the electronic warfare suite, she said, her voice calm but authoritative. The room fell silent. Commander Rayburn, who had entered behind her, snorted softly. Go on, Commander Van, Captain Mercer, the engineering department head, encouraged. Zephyra approached the main display. May I? When Mercer nodded, she brought up a different set of system diagnostics. The automated response protocols are creating a predictable pattern. If you look at the timing signatures between radar acquisition and countermeasure deployment, there's a cyclical gap every 87 seconds. She manipulated the display, highlighting data patterns most would overlook. Any adversary monitoring our electronic emissions could potentially exploit this window. It's brief, but in modern naval combat, milliseconds matter. That's purely theoretical, Rayburn interjected, and well beyond your department's concern. With respect, Commander, Zephyra replied, defense integration affects every department on this carrier. My suggested protocol modification would eliminate the vulnerability without compromising system performance. She outlined her solution with precise technical language, citing relevant naval regulations and engineering principles that left no room for dismissal based on credentials alone. Several senior engineers nodded in agreement as they followed her logic. Rayburn's face had hardened. This is the kind of overreach I've been concerned about. Commander Van consistently steps beyond her assigned duties to criticize systems she has limited clearance to access. I'm not criticizing, Commander. I'm identifying a potential threat to this vessel, Zephyra countered, her composure unbroken. Captain Mercer looked thoughtful. It's an unconventional approach, but technically sound. I'll have my team review your proposal, Commander Van. Captain, with all due respect, Rayburn began. That will be all for now, Mercer interrupted. We'll reconvene after further analysis. Rayburn's displeasure was palpable as the meeting dispersed. Zephyra gathered her materials, aware that she'd pushed the boundaries of her cover identity further than planned. The risk was calculated but necessary. The vulnerability she'd identified was real, and exactly the kind of weakness her actual mission was designed to expose. In his private office, Admiral Hargrove reviewed Zephyra Van's personnel file for the third time that week. 28 years old according to her records, with an engineering degree from Georgia Tech and specialized training at the Naval Postgraduate School. Distinguished service aboard 2 destroyers before her posting to the Liberty. Commendations for technical innovation. Everything seemed in order, and yet, something felt wrong. The file contained all the expected information, but lacked the subtle inconsistencies of a real career. It was too clean, too linear, and her knowledge base extended far beyond what her official background should allow. He reached for his secure phone, dialing a number few on the carrier knew existed. "This is Admiral Hargrove. I need everything you have on Lieutenant Commander Zafira Van. Something doesn't add up." There was a long pause before the response came. "I'm sorry, Admiral, but that file is classified beyond your clearance level." Hargrove's brow furrowed. "I'm the commanding officer of this carrier. There's no personnel file on my vessel I don't have access to." "In this case, sir, there is. That's all I can tell you." The line went dead. The Admiral stared at the phone, a chill settling over him. In 30 years of naval service, he had never been denied access to information about an officer under his command. Whatever Zafira Van was involved in went higher than his authority, and that made her presence on his carrier a potential threat. He made another call, this time to naval intelligence. "I need surveillance on Lieutenant Commander Van, full spectrum, maximum discretion, and I want it yesterday." 2 days later, the USS Liberty was conducting its final major inspection before deployment. The flight deck swarmed with personnel as aircraft systems were tested, munitions inventoried, and launch protocols verified. Admiral Hargrove stood on the bridge wing, overseeing operations with Commander Rayburn at his side. "Status of the electromagnetic launch system?" Hargrove asked. "Final calibrations underway, Admiral," Rayburn replied. "We're seeing optimal performance across all 4 catapults." Below them, Zafira moved methodically across the deck, her attention fixed on the testing sequence for Catapult 2. Something in the diagnostic readout caught her attention. A harmonic resonance that shouldn't have been present, suggesting potential stress fractures in the underlying support structure. She crossed to the technical team, examining their data before. Running her own calculations on her tablet, the results confirmed her suspicions. The current testing protocol was placing excessive stress on a critical juncture point. If left unaddressed, it could result in catastrophic failure during combat operations. The testing officer dismissed her concerns. "The system is performing within parameters, Commander. We've run this sequence a dozen times." "Parameters don't account for cumulative stress patterns," Zafira insisted. "This needs to be reported immediately." When the officer hesitated, she made a decision that violated chain of command, but aligned with her true mission. She headed directly for the bridge, where Admiral Hargrove was still observing operations. Security personnel stepped aside as she approached, her determination evident in every stride. "Admiral Hargrove, I need to speak with you urgently." Hargrove turned, surprise flickering across his features before his expression settled into cool authority. "This is highly irregular, Commander Van." "Sir, there's a critical flaw in the email's testing protocol. The current sequence is creating harmonic resonance in the structural supports. If it continues, we're looking at potential catastrophic failure during combat launch conditions." She handed him her tablet, the data clearly displayed. Commander Rayburn stepped forward, his face flushed. "Admiral, this is completely inappropriate. Commander Van has bypassed proper channels." "The issue requires immediate attention," Zafira interrupted, her eyes never leaving Hargrove's. "Lives are at stake." The Admiral studied her data, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up, not at Zafira, but at Rayburn. Something unspoken passed between them. "Thank you for your concern, Commander Van," Hargrove said finally, returning her tablet. "Commander Rayburn will ensure the appropriate technical teams review your findings." "Sir, with respect, this requires immediate—" "That will be all, Commander," Hargrove cut her off, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Report to the command deck at EO 600 tomorrow. We need to discuss your future aboard this vessel." Zafira recognized the dismissal for what it was. She saluted crisply and departed, her mind already calculating probabilities and contingencies. As she descended from the bridge, she discreetly pressed a recessed button on her communications bracelet, sending a single encrypted pulse to a receiver far beneath the waves. The signal contained no explicit message. It didn't need to. Its mere transmission would set specific protocols in motion. The night passed slowly, stars wheeling overhead as the carrier cut through dark waters. In her quarters, Zafira prepared methodically, removing certain personal items and securing them in a specialized case that would render them undetectable to standard searches. She slept briefly but deeply, decades of training, allowing her to rest precisely as long as necessary. At 05:45, she dressed in her standard uniform, her appearance immaculate. The only unusual element was the small communication device secured to her wrist beneath her sleeve. Not standard Navy issue, but something far more advanced. The command deck was unusually crowded when she arrived at exactly 0600. Every senior officer stood assembled in formation, with junior officers and select enlisted personnel lining the walls. Admiral Hargrove stood at the center, his face grim. Commander Rayburn stood slightly behind him, unable to fully suppress a satisfied expression. The atmosphere carried the unmistakable weight of public judgment. This wasn't a private reprimand. This was theater, designed to make an example. Zephyra had seen such displays before, though never as the subject. She walked forward with measured steps, her posture perfect, her face composed. Lieutenant Commander Van, Admiral Hargrove began, his voice pitched to carry to every corner of the room. Do you understand why you've been summoned here? I believe so, Admiral, she replied evenly. Then perhaps you can explain to your fellow officers why you repeatedly violate chain of command, access systems beyond your clearance level, and undermine the authority structure of this vessel. The accusation hung in the air. Zephyra could feel the collective gaze of the assembled crew, some curious, some uncomfortable, some satisfied. She remained silent, forcing Hargrove to continue. For 6 months, you've positioned yourself in sensitive areas of this carrier, documenting vulnerabilities, questioning established protocols, inserting yourself into security matters outside your purview. Hargrove stepped closer. At first, I attributed this to overzealous dedication. Now, I'm not so certain. He held up a folder. Your personnel file contains irregularities that naval intelligence cannot explain. Your technical knowledge exceeds your documented training. Your behavior follows patterns consistent with intelligence gathering, not mechanical maintenance. A ripple of murmurs passed through the assembled crew. Zephyra remained perfectly still, her breathing controlled, her eyes steady. What exactly are you doing on my ship, Commander Van? Hargrove demanded, his voice hardening. The room fell silent, all eyes on Zephyra. Lieutenant Adair looked troubled, while Rayburn barely contained his triumph. Captain Mercer's expression was carefully neutral, though concern shadowed his eyes. My duty, sir, Zephyra answered simply. Her response seemed to inflame rather than placate the Admiral. Your duty? Is it your duty to create discord among my officers? To question systems you shouldn't have access to? To document our defensive vulnerabilities in unauthorized reports? When those vulnerabilities threaten the safety of this vessel and its crew, yes, sir, she replied, her voice calm but resolute. Hargrove's expression darkened. You've been investigating this ship since you arrived, Commander. The question is, for whom? The implication of espionage or treason hung in the air. Several officers shifted uncomfortably. For the United States Navy, Admiral, she answered, her gaze unwavering. The same as you. I've reviewed your communications, your access patterns, your movements throughout this carrier, Hargrove continued. You behave like someone with an agenda beyond your stated role, like someone gathering intelligence. Zephyra said nothing, her silence neither confirming nor denying. If you believe I'm a threat to this vessel, Admiral, she finally said, her voice measured and calm, you should do what's necessary. Her composed acceptance seemed to catch him off guard. Among the watching officers, Lieutenant Adair leaned toward another junior officer, whispering, Why isn't she afraid? Beneath her sleeve, the communication device on Zephyra's wrist pulsed once, silently transmitting a signal to the depths below. No one in the room noticed the subtle movement of her finger activating the beacon. No one except perhaps Hargrove, whose eyes narrowed slightly. Lieutenant Commander Zephyra Van, the Admiral announced, his voice hardening into formal declaration. I find your actions inconsistent with the good order and discipline required aboard this vessel. You are hereby relieved of duty, effective immediately. He stepped forward, removing her insignia himself. A public humiliation designed to make the message clear to everyone present. As the badge came away in his hand, none of them noticed the tiny embedded transmitter concealed within it. You will be escorted from this vessel and transported to Naval Base San Diego, where you will await formal review of your conduct, Hargrove continued. Your security clearance is suspended pending investigation. Commander Rayburn couldn't suppress a satisfied smirk, though something in Zephyr's unwavering composure seemed to unsettle him. The younger officers looked troubled, particularly Adair, whose expression reflected open disbelief. "Do you have anything to say, Commander?" Hargrove asked, the formal title now a formality only. Zephyra stood with perfect military posture, her eyes revealing nothing, yet somehow everything. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken currents. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a quality few had heard before: absolute certainty. "Time will answer your questions, Admiral," she said simply, "sooner than you might expect." For a fleeting moment, uncertainty flickered across Hargrove's face, quickly masked by authority. "Marines, escort the former commander to her quarters to collect essential personal items, then to the departure point." 2 Marine guards stepped forward, flanking Zephyrah without touching her. With a final, precise salute to the assembled officers, she turned and walked away, her back straight, her steps measured. As the door closed behind her, the command deck erupted in hushed conversations. Admiral Hargrove dismissed the assembly, but the tension lingered like an electrical charge before a storm. Escorted by Marine guards, Zephyra walked the length of the massive carrier, passing through compartments and corridors where sailors stopped to watch her pass. Word traveled quickly on a naval vessel. Whispers followed in her wake. "They say she was spying on the ship's defenses. I heard she predicted that hydraulic failure before instruments even showed a problem." The Admiral wouldn't remove her badge personally unless it was serious. She ignored the speculation, her mind already shifted to the next phase. Everything was proceeding according to contingency plans established long before she ever set foot on the Liberty. Her dismissal was not a failure, but a trigger. The final catalyst needed to activate protocols that had been in place for months. At her quarters, she collected a single duffel bag, already prepared. The Marines stood at the door, watching but not interfering. They were professionals, showing neither disrespect nor sympathy. The journey continued through the carrier's maze of corridors and ladders, eventually reaching the gangway where a small transport boat waited below. Sailors and officers lined her path, curiosity and judgment in their eyes. At the gangway, she paused, turning to face the massive vessel one last time. Instead of the shame or anger expected from someone publicly dismissed, her expression held something entirely different. A strange certainty that unsettled those watching closely. Her eyes scanned the gathering, noting who watched with satisfaction and who with doubt. With precision born from years of discipline, Zephyra rendered a perfect salute to the ship and its crew. Then she turned, descended the gangway with measured steps, and boarded the waiting boat without a backward glance. From the bridge, Admiral Hargrove watched through binoculars as the small craft pulled away, disappearing into the morning mist that hung low over the water. "Keep surveillance on that boat," he ordered. "I want to know exactly where she goes." "Sir," Commander Rayburn said cautiously, "do you really think she's a security threat? Or just an officer who overstepped?" The Admiral lowered his binoculars slowly. "I don't know what she is, Commander, and that's precisely what concerns me." In Washington, D.C., a secure terminal in a windowless room deep beneath the Pentagon lit up with an automated message: "Deepwater Protocol activated." The naval intelligence officer monitoring the system straightened immediately, her eyes widening at the implications. She reached for a specialized phone, one connected to a line used only in extraordinary circumstances. "Get me the Secretary of the Navy," she said, her voice tense. "Operation Blindspot has been compromised. Sentinel is surfacing." Back on the USS Liberty, routine operations had resumed, though an undercurrent of tension remained. Admiral Hargrove had retreated to his office, reviewing security protocols and preparing a formal report on Van's dismissal. Commander Rayburn supervised flight operations, his earlier satisfaction now tempered by the Admiral's continued unease. 2 hours passed. In the carrier's radar room, Ensign Marcus Chen noticed an anomaly on his screen, a massive sonar signature moving toward the carrier at unusual speed. He adjusted his equipment, verifying the reading before alerting his superior. "Sir, I'm tracking an unidentified submarine-sized contact, bearing 090, range 12 nautical miles, and closing." Lieutenant Commander Walsh leaned over his shoulder, studying the signature with growing concern. "That's too large for a conventional attack submarine. And the speed? Nothing moves that fast underwater." Could it be a false return? Chen suggested. Walsh shook his head, already reaching for the direct line to the bridge. No, the pattern's too consistent. He paused, his finger hovering over the button as additional data scrolled across the screen. His face drained of color. Sir, Chen prompted. That's a strategic operations vessel, Walsh said quietly, pointing to the identification code now blinking on the screen. USS Sentinel, Deep Operations Command. Chen's eyes widened. I've never heard of it. That's the point, Ensign. Walsh pressed the bridge communication button. Bridge, radar. We have a submarine contact, designated friendly, bearing 090, range now 8 nautical miles, and closing rapidly. IFF identifies as USS Sentinel, Deep Operations Command. On the bridge, the communications officer relayed the information to Admiral Hargrove, who had been summoned from his office. Sentinel, there is no USS Sentinel in the active fleet. Sir, the communications officer replied. Radar confirms it's a United States vessel. Size estimate suggests a nuclear-class submarine, but it's bigger than anything in our known inventory. Broadcast standard identification challenge, Hargrove ordered, moving to the tactical display. Moments later, the communications officer looked up, confusion evident in his expression. Sir, they're responding with verification codes I've never seen before. The system is authenticating them as top-level clearance. That's impossible, Rayburn said, joining them at the display. We have access to all current naval authorization codes. The radar officer's voice came through again. Bridge, radar. The contact has changed course. Sir, it's surfacing. Current position 1,000 yards off our port side. Hargrove moved to the bridge wing, raising his binoculars. The ocean's surface had begun to churn, white foam spreading in a widening circle as something massive rose from below. Sound general quarters, he ordered, his voice tense. All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. Alarms blared throughout the carrier as sailors rushed to their posts. Fighter pilots ran toward their aircraft while weapon systems came online. The tension on the bridge was palpable as officers awaited the Admiral's next orders. Sir, the communications officer called, his voice strained. Incoming transmission on the secure channel. It's from the Pentagon, sir, the Secretary of the Navy. Admiral Hargrove took the receiver, his expression grim. This is Admiral Hargrove. As he listened, the color drained from his face. His eyes moved to the port side, where the mysterious submarine had begun to break the surface. Outside, the ocean roared as a massive black hole breached the waves, water cascading from specialized stealth panels, unlike anything in the known naval arsenal. Sailors and officers crowded the railings, watching in stunned silence as the submarine fully surfaced, sleek, obsidian, and clearly advanced beyond any vessel they had encountered. On the bridge, Admiral Hargrove slowly lowered the receiver, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. Commander Rayburn stepped closer, his earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty. Admiral, what are our orders? Hargrove's gaze remained fixed on the submarine. Stand down, Commander. All stations stand down immediately. Sir, Rayburn questioned, confusion evident in his voice. Those are direct orders from the Secretary of the Navy, Hargrove replied, his voice hollow. We are to cease all operations and prepare to receive the commanding officer of the USS Sentinel with full military honors. As the crew watched in growing amazement, the submarine's hatch opened. A figure emerged onto the conning tower, standing tall against the wind and spray. Even from a distance, the silhouette was unmistakable. Lieutenant Adair, watching from the flight deck, voiced what many were thinking. Is that Commander Van? Through his binoculars, Admiral Hargrove could clearly see Zephyra standing atop the submarine, now dressed in the distinctive black uniform of Deep Operations Command, captain's insignia gleaming on her collar. Behind her, a crew in matching uniforms emerged, forming a ceremonial line along the submarine's deck. Admiral, the communications officer called. The Secretary is ordering you personally to meet Captain Van on the flight deck. He says... The officer hesitated, checking the message again. He says Operation Blindspot has been compromised, and you are to provide Captain Van with all courtesy appropriate to her actual rank and position. The implications crashed over Hargrove like a wave. Zephyra Van was not who she had appeared to be. The mechanic he had just publicly dismissed apparently commanded one of the most advanced vessels in the Navy, a submarine whose existence had been hidden from him despite his rank and clearance. As the massive submarine held position alongside the carrier, Hargrove lowered his binoculars slowly, the full magnitude of his error becoming clear. The question that had driven him to remove Van, "What exactly are you doing on my ship?" now had an answer he never could have anticipated. And based on the secretary's tone, he was about to face consequences far more significant than he had imposed on her just hours before. What would you do if you discovered the person you publicly humiliated was secretly much more powerful than you ever imagined? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and if this tale of hidden strength resonates with you, please consider subscribing for more stories of extraordinary people in unexpected situations. The command deck fell silent as Admiral Hargrove's words hung in the air. "Lieutenant Commander Zafira Van, you are hereby relieved of duty, effective immediately." The assembled officers watched as he stepped forward, his weathered fingers working methodically to remove her insignia. A public display of authority meant to leave no doubt about who held power aboard the USS Liberty. As her badge came away in his hand, Zafira maintained perfect composure, her eyes never wavering from the Admiral's. The tiny embedded transmitter concealed within the badge sent its final signal before deactivation, a redundant measure she had anticipated might be necessary. Commander Rayburn stood nearby, satisfaction evident in the slight curl of his lip. The younger officers, Lieutenant Adair among them, shifted uncomfortably, their expressions ranging from confusion to troubled concern. Captain Mercer kept his face carefully neutral, though his eyes betrayed calculation, reassessing everything he thought he knew about the woman, standing at attention before them. "You will be escorted from this vessel and transported to Naval Base San Diego, where you will await formal review of your conduct," Hargrove continued, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades of command. "Your security clearance is suspended pending investigation." The tension in the room was palpable, the silence broken only by the distant hum of the carrier's systems and the soft breathing of the assembled crew. All eyes remained fixed on Zafira, waiting for her reaction: tears, protest, anger. What they saw instead was something far more unsettling: absolute calm. "Do you have anything to say, Commander?" Hargrove asked, the formal title now stripped of its meaning. Zephyra's posture remained military perfect, her eyes revealing nothing, yet somehow everything at once. When she spoke, her voice carried a quality few had heard before, not defiance, not surrender, but certainty. "Time will answer your questions, Admiral," she said simply, "sooner than you might expect." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Hargrove's face, there and gone in an instant. Something in her tone had touched a nerve, a subtle reminder that dismissal didn't equal defeat. He masked his reaction quickly, but not before Zafira had registered it, another data point in her ongoing assessment. "Marines, escort the former commander to her quarters to collect essential personal items, then to the departure point," Hargrove ordered, eager to conclude the matter. 2 Marine guards stepped forward, taking positions on either side of Zafira without touching her, a small courtesy reflective of her former rank. She acknowledged them with a slight nod before delivering a final, precise salute to the assembled officers. The gesture was textbook perfect, neither rushed nor lingering, embodying the discipline that even her detractors couldn't deny. With measured steps, she turned and walked toward the door, her back straight, her bearing unchanged despite her altered circumstances. As she passed Lieutenant Adair, their eyes met briefly. The young officer's expression telegraphed his discomfort with the proceedings, but she gave no sign of recognition or reassurance. This wasn't the time for alliances. The door closed behind her with a hydraulic hiss, sealing her from view, but not from the conversations that erupted in her wake. Admiral Hargrove dismissed the assembly with a curt gesture, his attention already turning to security protocols and the reports that would need to be filed. Commander Rayburn lingered, moving to the Admiral's side as the room cleared. "A necessary action, sir," Rayburn said, his voice low. Her behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. Hargrove didn't respond immediately, his gaze fixed on the closed door. "Have security sweep her quarters after she's gone. I want every piece of equipment, every data device cataloged and examined." "You believe she was gathering intelligence?" Rayburn asked, interest sharpening his features. "I believe," Hargrove replied carefully, "that nothing about Commander Van has been what it appeared to be, and I intend to find out why." Escorted by the Marine guards, Zafira made her way through the carrier's labyrinthine interior. The massive vessel housed over 5,000 personnel, most of whom knew her only by reputation or casual interaction. Word traveled quickly aboard ship, however. As they passed through compartments and corridors, conversations faltered, heads turned, eyes followed. "They say she was spying on the ship's defenses," one sailor whispered to another, not quite softly enough. "I heard she predicted that hydraulic failure before instruments even showed a problem," came the reply. A chief petty officer silenced them with a glare as Zafira passed, but the damage was done. Speculation would spread throughout the ship within hours, narratives forming and solidifying without facts to anchor them. It was human nature, and precisely the psychological element her mission had been designed to assess. At her quarters, the Marines took positions outside while she collected her belongings. The room was Spartan by civilian standards, but reflected her supposed personality. Technical manuals neatly arranged, a small collection of classical literature, minimal personal effects. A photograph of an older couple, fabricated relations who existed only in carefully constructed background files, sat on the desk. Zafira moved with practiced efficiency, selecting only what a dismissed officer would reasonably take: clothing, basic toiletries, the photograph. Her most important possessions, specialized communications devices, technical tools disguised as ordinary objects, had been distributed throughout her belongings, designed to appear unremarkable under scrutiny. Within minutes, she had packed a single duffel bag. The Marine sergeant nodded approvingly at her readiness, one professional acknowledging another's efficiency. "We're to escort you to the departure point, ma'am," he said, the courtesy title offered despite her changed status. "Thank you, Sergeant," she replied simply, shouldering the bag herself, rather than allowing him to carry it. It was a small assertion of capability, maintaining dignity in the face of dismissal. The journey continued through the carrier's maze of compartments. Each section they passed through carried its own atmosphere: the focused intensity of the Combat Information Center, the controlled chaos of the mess decks, the meticulous precision of the ordnance handling areas. Zafira noted it all, her mind cataloging final observations, even as her official role aboard the Liberty came to its calculated end. They arrived at the gangway where a small transport boat waited below, rocking gently in the carrier's massive shadow. A small crowd had gathered, some out of curiosity, others from genuine concern. Lieutenant Adair stood among them, his troubled expression suggesting he felt witness to an injustice he couldn't articulate. At the gangway, Zafira paused, turning to face the massive vessel one last time. The USS Liberty represented the pinnacle of conventional naval power, 90,000 tons of American military might, home to dozens of aircraft and thousands of personnel. And yet, for all its imposing presence, she had identified 17 critical vulnerabilities during her brief tenure aboard. Her gaze swept over the assembled onlookers, noting who watched with satisfaction, who with doubt, who with indifference. These reactions, too, were data points, indicators of how prejudice and authority could blind even intelligent people to truth hiding in plain sight. With precision born from years of discipline, Zafira rendered a perfect salute to the ship and its crew. The gesture acknowledged not the circumstances of her departure, but the institution itself, a subtle distinction that wouldn't be lost on the career naval personnel observing. Then she turned, descended the gangway with measured steps, and boarded the waiting boat without a backward glance. The small craft's pilot was a young petty officer who avoided eye contact, uncomfortable with the task of transporting a disgraced officer. "Where to, ma'am?" he asked, the formality automatic despite her situation. Instead of answering, Zafira removed a specialized communications device from her pocket, more advanced than anything in the regular Navy's inventory. "Just keep this heading for 2 more minutes, she instructed, her tone shifting subtly from the deferential manner she'd maintained aboard the carrier to something more authoritative. The pilot noticed the change, glancing at her with newfound uncertainty. "Ma'am?" 2 minutes, petty officer, she repeated, activating the device. "After that, you'll return to the Liberty with a fascinating story to tell." From the bridge of the USS Liberty, Admiral Hargrove tracked the transport boat through binoculars, watching as it grew smaller against the vast ocean canvas. Maintain surveillance on that boat, he ordered. I want to know exactly where she goes. Commander Rayburn stood nearby, his earlier triumph tempered by the Admiral's continued intensity. Sir, he ventured cautiously, do you really think she's a security threat? Or just an officer who overstepped? Hargrove lowered the binoculars slowly, his expression troubled. I don't know what she is, Commander. And that's precisely what concerns me. He turned to his communications officer. Contact Naval Intelligence. I want everything they have on Van. Classification be damned. Tell them it's a matter of fleet security. The officer hesitated. Sir, if her file is classified above your clearance, then they can send someone with proper clearance to brief me, Hargrove interrupted. But I will not have an unknown quantity operating in my waters without understanding what we're dealing with. In Washington, D.C., deep beneath the Pentagon's eastern wing, a secure monitoring station registered an automated alert. The terminal displayed a simple message against a black background. Deepwater Protocol activated. Naval Intelligence Commander Elise Harrington, who had been reviewing unrelated reports, straightened immediately in her chair, coffee forgotten as she processed the implications. Confirmation code? She demanded of the technician monitoring the system. Authenticated, ma'am. Signal origin confirms it's from Commander Van's emergency beacon. Harrington reached for a specialized phone, one connected to a line used only for matters of exceptional security. Get me the Secretary of the Navy, she said, her voice tense with controlled urgency. Operation Blind Spot has been compromised. Sentinel is surfacing. As the call connected, she turned to another officer. Alert Deep Operations Command. Inform Captain Linares that Preemptive Protocol 7 is in effect. The USS Sentinel is to proceed to Liberty's coordinates at maximum speed. The younger officer's eyes widened. That puts Sentinel at Liberty's position within 2 hours, Harrington finished for him. Exactly as planned if this contingency arose. Operation Blind Spot was always a calculated risk, Lieutenant. Now we see if the fallback protocols are as effective as we theorized. Back at sea, the small transport boat maintained its heading away from the carrier. Zephyra stood at the bow, her posture relaxed for the first time in months as she shed the carefully constructed persona she'd maintained aboard the Liberty. The petty officer piloting the boat watched her transformation with growing unease. Commander, he finally said, we're approaching the 10-mile perimeter. I need coordinates for your destination. Zephyra checked the specialized device in her hand, noting the encrypted acknowledgement from Deep Operations Command. Maintain current heading for exactly 43 more seconds. Then you'll want to execute a 180-degree turn and return to the Liberty at maximum speed. The pilot's confusion was evident. Ma'am? A faint smile touched Zephyra's lips. You're about to witness something few in the regular Navy ever see, petty officer. Consider it a privilege. She pointed to a seemingly empty stretch of ocean ahead. Right there. The water had begun to churn subtly, disturbed by something massive moving beneath the surface. The pilot's eyes widened as he registered the implications, his hand instinctively moving toward the radio. I wouldn't, Zephyra advised calmly. What's happening is well beyond your security clearance. Just watch. Within moments, a sleek black shape broke the water's surface, a small, specialized extraction vessel, unlike any standard naval craft. Its hull gleamed with the same advanced materials as the communication device in Zephyra's hand. That's my ride, she said simply, gathering her duffel bag. Return to the Liberty. Tell Admiral Hargrove exactly what you saw, every detail. Before the stunned pilot could respond, Zephyra had transferred to the waiting vessel, which immediately began to submerge again. Within seconds, both she and the unusual craft had disappeared beneath the waves, leaving only a dissipating circle of disturbed water as evidence they had ever been there. The pilot stared at the empty ocean for several heartbeats, then executed the instructed turn, pushing the boat's engines to maximum as he raced back toward the carrier. His thoughts tumbled over one another, attempting to make sense of what he'd witnessed. One thing was certain. Commander Van was definitely not what she had appeared to be. Beneath the surface, the extraction vessel descended rapidly, its advanced propulsion system allowing speeds impossible for conventional underwater craft. Zephyra secured her bag and settled into a specialized command chair, accepting a communications headset from a waiting crew member. Secure channel established, Captain, the operator reported. Deep Operations Command awaiting your briefing. Patch me through, Zephyra ordered, her voice carrying the natural authority she'd suppressed during her months aboard the Liberty. When the connection confirmed, she spoke without preamble. Blind spot compromised at Phase 3. Liberty command structure responded exactly as predicted to perceived security anomalies. Recommend immediate implementation of Revelation Protocol to maximize intelligence yield. The response came through in Admiral Harrington's voice. Acknowledged, Captain Van. Sentinel is already en route to your position. ETA 90 minutes. Extraction vessel will rendezvous for transfer. The Secretary has authorized full Revelation Protocol. Liberty is about to learn some uncomfortable truths about their security vulnerabilities, and about their judgment regarding female officers in technical roles, Zephyra added, a hint of satisfaction in her tone. That too, Harrington agreed, though that was always a secondary objective. Sometimes the secondary objectives prove most illuminating, Zephyra replied. Liberty's command bias created exploitable security gaps that would have been catastrophic in actual combat conditions. The data supports everything we theorized. Your complete report will make interesting reading for the Joint Chiefs, Harrington said. For now, prepare for Sentinel rendezvous. It's time Captain Van officially replaced Commander Van. The extraction vessel continued its swift journey through the depths, eventually reaching the designated coordinates where the USS Sentinel waited. Unlike conventional submarines, Sentinel remained undetectable to standard sonar. Its revolutionary hull design and acoustic suppression systems, rendering it effectively invisible to all but the most advanced detection methods. As Zephyra transferred aboard through a specialized docking mechanism, she was greeted by her actual crew, men and women she had selected personally for the Sentinel program, each exceptional in their specialized fields. Executive Officer Marcus Linares saluted crisply as she stepped into the submarine's command center. Welcome back, Captain, he said. The crew is at action stations. All systems operational. We've maintained silent running as ordered. Status of Liberty's tracking attempts? Zephyra asked, moving directly to the tactical display. Ineffective, Linares replied with professional satisfaction. Their active sonar sweeps passed directly over us twice without registration. Passive arrays are similarly blind to our presence. Zephyra nodded, unsurprised but pleased with the confirmation. And their transport boat? Returned to the carrier approximately 30 minutes ago. Based on increased communications activity, we believe the pilot reported the extraction event exactly as instructed. Good. Zephyra studied the tactical display, which showed the Liberty continuing standard operations, unaware of Sentinel's presence less than 2 miles from their position. Prepare for Phase 2 of Revelation Protocol. Surface time is in 45 minutes. While Sentinel maintained its silent vigil, activity aboard the USS Liberty had intensified. The transport boat's return had caused a minor sensation, with the pilot's report quickly reaching Admiral Hargrove. The account of Zephyra's mysterious departure aboard an unknown submersible triggered an immediate security response. On the bridge, Hargrove had ordered increased surveillance and elevated the carrier's alert status. I want continuous active and passive sonar sweeps, he instructed. If there's anything larger than a fish within 20 miles of this carrier, I want to know about it. Commander Rayburn coordinated the response, his earlier dismissiveness regarding Zephyra now replaced with growing concern. Sir, the pilot's description doesn't match any known naval vessel in our inventory. I'm aware of that, Commander, Hargrove replied tersely, which suggests either foreign technology operating in our waters or U.S. assets I don't have clearance to know about. Neither possibility is comforting. The communications officer interrupted with fresh urgency. Admiral, Naval Intelligence is on the secure line. They're requesting to speak with you immediately. Hargrove took the receiver, his expression darkening as he listened to the voice on the other end. I understand, he said finally, but I want it noted formally that keeping a carrier group commander in the dark about covert operations within his area of responsibility creates unacceptable security risks. He paused, listening again. Very well. We'll maintain position and await further instructions. As he replaced the receiver, Rayburn moved closer. Sir? Hargrove's expression was unreadable. It seems we've stumbled into something above our pay grade, Commander. Naval Intelligence has instructed us to maintain current position and stand by for direct communication from the Secretary of the Navy within the hour. The Secretary himself, Rayburn asked, unable to mask his surprise. This is about Van? Apparently, Hargrove confirmed, Lieutenant Commander Van was not exactly who her file claimed she was. Beyond that, I'm told I lack the clearance for details. His jaw tightened with barely suppressed frustration. For now, we follow orders and prepare for whatever comes next. The carrier maintained its position as ordered, though tension spread throughout the vessel as rumors circulated about Commander Van's departure and the increased security measures. In the radar room, Ensign Marcus Chen monitored his station with heightened attention, aware that something significant was unfolding. 2 hours after Zephyr's departure, Chen noticed an anomaly on his screen, a massive sonar signature moving toward the carrier at unusual speed. He adjusted his equipment, verifying the reading before alerting his superior. Sir, I'm tracking an unidentified submarine-sized contact, bearing 090, range 12 nautical miles and closing. Lieutenant Commander Walsh leaned over his shoulder, studying the signature with growing concern. That's too large for a conventional attack submarine, and the speed, nothing moves that fast underwater. Could it be a false return? Chen suggested. Walsh shook his head, already reaching for the direct line to the bridge. No, the pattern's too consistent. He paused, his finger hovering over the button as additional data scrolled across the screen, his face drained of color. Sir, Chen prompted. That's a strategic operations vessel, Walsh said quietly, pointing to the identification code now blinking on the screen. USS Sentinel, Deep Operations Command. Chen's eyes widened. I've never heard of it. That's the point, Ensign. Walsh pressed the bridge communication button. Bridge, radar. We have a submarine contact, designated friendly, bearing 090, range now 8 nautical miles and closing rapidly. IFF identifies as USS Sentinel, Deep Operations Command. On the bridge, the communications officer relayed the information to Admiral Hargrove, who had been awaiting some form of contact since his conversation with Naval Intelligence. Sentinel, there is no USS Sentinel in the active fleet. Sir, the communications officer replied. Radar confirms it's a United States vessel. Size estimate suggests a nuclear-class submarine, but it's bigger than anything in our known inventory. Hargrove moved to the tactical display, studying the approaching signature. Broadcast Standard Identification Challenge. Moments later, the communications officer looked up, confusion evident in his expression. Sir, they're responding with verification codes I've never seen before. The system is authenticating them as top-level clearance. That's impossible, Rayburn said, joining them at the display. We have access to all current naval authorization codes. The radar officer's voice came through again. Bridge, radar. The contact has changed course. Sir, it's surfacing. Current position 1,000 yards off our port side. Hargrove moved to the bridge wing, raising his binoculars. The ocean's surface had begun to churn, white foam spreading in a widening circle as something massive rose from below. Sound General Quarters, he ordered, his voice tense. All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. Alarms blared throughout the carrier as sailors rushed to their posts. Fighter pilots ran toward their aircraft while weapons systems came online. The tension on the bridge was palpable as officers awaited the Admiral's next orders. Sir, the communications officer called urgently. Incoming transmission on the secure channel. It's the Pentagon, sir. The Secretary of the Navy. Admiral Hargrove took the receiver, his expression grim. This is Admiral Hargrove. As he listened, his face registered a progression of emotions. Disbelief, confusion, and finally, a dawning horror. His gaze remained fixed on the port side, where the mysterious submarine had begun to break the surface. I understand, Mr. Secretary, he said finally, his voice noticeably strained. Yes, sir. We will comply fully. He replaced the receiver slowly, his movements mechanical. Admiral, Rayburn prompted, concern evident in his tone. What are our orders? Hargrove turned to face his officers, struggling to mask his shock. Stand down, Commander. All stations stand down. Immediately. Sir? Rayburn questioned, confusion evident. Those are direct orders from the Secretary of the Navy, Hargrove replied, his voice hollow with realization. We are to cease all operations and prepare to receive the commanding officer of the USS Sentinel with full military honors. Outside, the ocean roared as a massive black hull breached the waves. water cascading from specialized stealth panels, unlike anything in the known naval arsenal. The vessel was clearly a submarine, but its design departed radically from conventional models, sleeker, more angular, with hull materials that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. Sailors and officers crowded the railings, watching in stunned silence as the submarine fully surfaced, a revelation of military technology they hadn't known existed. Its size alone was impressive, nearly twice the length of a Virginia-class attack submarine, yet somehow more graceful in its proportions. "What the hell is that?" Rayburn whispered, momentarily forgetting protocol. Hargrove didn't reprimand him. The question echoed his own thoughts exactly. "Apparently," he said quietly, "it's the USS Sentinel, and according to the Secretary, its commanding officer is someone we recently dismissed from service." As understanding dawned on Rayburn's face, the submarine's forward hatch began to open. A figure emerged onto the conning tower, standing tall against the wind and spray. Even from a distance, the silhouette was unmistakable. "Is that Commander Van?" Lieutenant Adair asked from his position on the flight deck, voicing the collective shock of those watching. Through his binoculars, Admiral Hargrove could clearly see Zephyra standing atop the submarine, now dressed in the distinctive black uniform of Deep Operations Command, captain's insignia gleaming on her collar. Behind her, a crew in matching uniforms emerged, forming a ceremonial line along the submarine's deck. The communications officer approached Hargrove, his expression grave. "Admiral, the Secretary is ordering you personally to meet Captain Van on the flight deck. He says—" The officer hesitated, checking the message again. "He says Operation Blindspot has been compromised, and you are to provide Captain Van with all courtesy appropriate to her actual rank and position." Hargrove lowered his binoculars slowly, the full implications crashing over him like a physical wave. Zephyra Van was not who she had appeared to be. The mechanic he had just publicly dismissed apparently commanded one of the most advanced vessels in the Navy, a submarine whose existence had been hidden from him, despite his rank and clearance. And now, on direct orders from the Secretary of the Navy, he would have to face her again, not as a subordinate he could discipline, but as an equal, or perhaps even a superior, in a chain of command he hadn't known existed. As this realization settled over him, the communications officer interrupted again. "Admiral, every communication system on the carrier is activating simultaneously. It's a broadcast override from Strategic Command." Before Hargrove could respond, every speaker on the massive vessel crackled to life. A voice, not Zephyra's, but a high-ranking Pentagon official, filled the ship. "USS Liberty, this is Naval Strategic Command. You are to cease all operations and stand down immediately. The USS Sentinel is authorized to approach and board. Admiral Hargrove, you are to receive its commanding officer with full military honors." The voice paused, then added with unmistakable authority, "Operation Blindspot has entered its final phase. Cooperation is not optional." Every sailor and officer aboard the Liberty froze at the unprecedented communication. Admiral Hargrove's face drained of color as he processed the implications. The mysterious submarine holding position alongside his carrier wasn't just an unknown vessel, it was part of a classified operation that had apparently been underway right under his nose. And Zephyra Van, the officer he had dismissed hours earlier with such certainty, stood at its center. If you've ever underestimated someone only to discover they held far more power than you realized, share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the most dangerous assumption is believing we know exactly who stands before us. Subscribe to see the conclusion of this naval showdown and discover the full truth behind Operation Blindspot. The ocean churned violently as the USS Sentinel broke the surface, thousands of gallons of seawater cascading from its obsidian hull. Unlike conventional submarines with their utilitarian designs, the Sentinel possessed a predatory elegance, sleek, angular, with specialized stealth panels that seemed to devour light rather than reflect it. The vessel was a technological marvel, its very existence classified beyond the knowledge of most admirals. From the bridge of the USS Liberty, Admiral Hargrove watched through binoculars as the submarine fully surfaced, its massive form dwarfing any attack submarine in the known naval arsenal. The revelation of such advanced technology was shocking enough. What came next defied everything he had believed about his command and authority. The submarine's forward hatch opened slowly, deliberately. A figure emerged onto the conning tower, standing tall against the wind and spray. Through his binoculars, Hargrove could clearly see Zephyr Van, the officer he had dismissed in disgrace just hours earlier, now dressed in the distinctive black uniform of Deep Operations Command, captain's insignia gleaming on her collar. "It can't be," he whispered, lowering the binoculars briefly before raising them again, as if the reality might change upon second viewing. Behind Zephyra, additional crew members emerged in matching uniforms, forming a ceremonial line along the submarine's deck. Their disciplined precision spoke of elite training and absolute confidence in their commander. The communications officer approached Hargrove, his expression grave. "Admiral, the Secretary of the Navy is ordering you personally to meet Captain Van on the flight deck. He says Operation Blind Spot has been compromised, and you are to provide Captain Van with all courtesy appropriate to her actual rank and position." Hargrove absorbed the information in stunned silence, the implications expanding like concentric waves from a dropped stone. He turned to Commander Rayburn, whose earlier smugness had dissolved into confusion, bordering on alarm. "Prepare the officer's contingent," Hargrove ordered, his voice strained but controlled. "Full military honors as directed." "Sir," Rayburn began, hesitation evident in his tone. "What exactly is—" "I don't know, Commander," Hargrove interrupted, "but we have direct orders from the Secretary of the Navy, and we will follow them to the letter." He gestured toward the submarine. Whatever Captain Van's actual mission was aboard this carrier, we're about to find out. Throughout the USS Liberty, confusion reigned as sailors and officers struggled to understand what was happening. The mysterious submarine had appeared from nowhere, triggering general quarters, only to be recognized as friendly by the highest levels of command. Now, their recently dismissed engineering officer appeared to be commanding it. The cognitive dissonance was nearly physical in its intensity. On the flight deck, Lieutenant Adair coordinated with the Master-at-Arms to organize the reception party. Like everyone else, he was operating on minimal information, following orders without context. Unlike most, however, he had always sensed something extraordinary about Commander Van, an underlying capability at odds with how others perceived her. "Boat approaching from Sentinel," a deck officer reported. "Captain Van requests permission to come aboard." Adair took a deep breath. Permission granted, prepare to render honors. A sleek launch detached from the submarine, crossing the short distance to the carrier with impressive speed. As it approached the boarding ladder, the boatswain's mate sounded the traditional whistle. The honor guard assembled in perfect formation, side boys at attention, as protocol demanded for a visiting captain. When Zephyra climbed the ladder and stepped onto the flight deck of the USS Liberty, the transformation was complete. Gone was any trace of the deferential engineering officer who had accepted dismissal hours earlier. In her place stood a naval captain of extraordinary presence, back straight, eyes clear, authority radiating from every movement. She wore the black uniform of Deep Operations Command, a division of the Navy so classified that most officers believed it to be merely a rumor. Her insignia identified her as a full captain, a rank 2 levels above what she had ostensibly held aboard the Liberty. Behind her followed 6 officers from the Sentinel, each bearing specialized tablets and equipment. As tradition required, Zephyra saluted the national ensign first, then turned to salute the waiting officers. Admiral Hargrove stood at their center, his face a study in controlled shock as he returned the salute. "Request permission to come aboard, Admiral," Zephyr said formally. "Permission granted, Captain Van," Hargrove replied, the changed address tasting foreign on his tongue. "The Secretary of the Navy informs me that we are to extend every courtesy." "Thank you, Admiral." Her voice carried easily across the deck, neither gloating nor apologetic. "I believe we have matters to discuss that would be best addressed in the carrier's secure briefing room." "Of course," Hargrove gestured toward the island superstructure, "if you'll follow me." As they walked, sailors and officers stopped to stare, whispers following in their wake. The woman they had watched leave in disgrace now returned with the full weight of high command behind her. The symbolism was impossible to miss, a visual representation of authority upended and reconstituted. Commander Rayburn walked slightly behind them, his face flushed with a complex mixture of emotions. His public criticism of Zephyra played back in his mind, each remembered comment more damning in light of her actual identity and rank. The secure briefing room was cleared of all personnel, save those with direct involvement. Admiral Hargrove, Commander Rayburn, and Captain Mercer represented the Liberty. Zephyra and her executive officer, Commander Marcus Linares, represented the Sentinel. Once the room was secured, Zephyra activated a specialized device that created an additional layer of electronic protection against surveillance. "Before we begin," she said, her tone businesslike, "I should clarify that everything discussed in this room is classified at the highest level. No records are to be made without explicit authorization from Deep Operations Command." Admiral Hargrove nodded stiffly. "Understood, Captain. Perhaps you could begin by explaining exactly what Operation Blindspot is, and why my carrier was selected for it without my knowledge." Zephyra met his gaze directly. Operation Blindspot is a naval intelligence program designed to identify and assess vulnerabilities in carrier group security protocols. For the past 3 years, we've been embedding deep cover officers aboard carriers throughout the fleet. These officers possess specific technical expertise and are tasked with identifying weaknesses that could be exploited by hostile actors. She gestured to one of her officers, who distributed tablets displaying classified documentation. "My assignment to the Liberty was the 5th such deployment. My cover as a flight deck specialist with engineering expertise was designed to test how carrier personnel respond to technical insights coming from unexpected sources, particularly when those sources don't fit conventional naval leadership profiles." "You were testing us," Hargrove said, realization dawning. The hydraulic failure, the email's concerns, the electronic warfare integration issues were all legitimate vulnerabilities, Zephyra confirmed. Some I identified, others I merely highlighted. The point was to observe how the command structure responded when critical information came from someone perceived as an outsider. In this case, a female officer in a predominantly male technical environment. Commander Rayburn shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "This was a psychological test?" "In part," Zephyra acknowledged. "But the technical vulnerabilities were very real. Had this been an actual infiltration by a hostile intelligence asset, the Liberty would have been compromised in multiple critical systems." She activated a holographic display showing 17 distinct vulnerabilities throughout the carrier's systems, each one she had identified during her 6-month assignment. The level of detail was staggering, revealing how thoroughly she had assessed the vessel while maintaining her cover. "Your dismissal of me this morning," she continued, looking directly at Admiral Hargrove, "triggered the final phase of Operation Blindspot. The appearance of the USS Sentinel was always the contingency plan if a deep cover officer's concerns were systematically rejected to the point of removal." Hargrove's jaw tightened. "You're suggesting I compromise my vessel's security by relieving you of duty?" "I'm stating it explicitly," Zephyra replied without hesitation. "The rejection of valid security concerns based on the messenger rather than the message represents a critical vulnerability in naval operations. That's precisely what Operation Blindspot was designed to assess." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Captain Mercer, who had remained quiet until now, leaned forward. "The emails issue you raised yesterday. How serious is it?" "Potentially catastrophic," Zephyra answered, switching the display to detailed engineering schematics. "The current testing protocol creates harmonic resonance in the structural supports. Over time, this would lead to metal fatigue and potential failure during combat operations. Had this been an actual combat situation, aircraft could have been lost during launch, with possible cascading failures throughout the system." Mercer paled slightly. "And our dismissal of your warning is documented as evidence that our current command structure is vulnerable to the same infiltration tactics I employed," she said. "The difference is that I was identifying problems to improve security. A hostile agent would be creating or exploiting them to cause maximum damage." Admiral Hargrove absorbed this information, his expression gradually shifting from defensive anger to reluctant understanding. "The Secretary mentioned that other carriers have been similarly tested." 5 so far, Zephyra confirmed. "With varying results, some command structures proved more receptive than others to warnings from unconventional sources." "And the USS Sentinel?" Hargrove asked, gesturing toward the submarine, visible through the briefing room's reinforced windows. I assume that's not standard Navy equipment either. For the first time, a hint of pride crossed Zafira's features. The Sentinel is the lead vessel in the Navy's next-generation submarine program. Deep Operations Command has been developing advanced stealth and propulsion systems for the past decade. What you're seeing represents the culmination of that work, a submarine capable of outperforming anything currently in service, including Russian and Chinese models. Commander Linares, Sentinel's executive officer, added, "The vessel incorporates revolutionary acoustic suppression and hull design elements. It can operate at depths and speeds previously considered impossible, with weapon systems and surveillance capabilities that redefine naval warfare parameters." "And you command this vessel," Hargrove stated, the question implicit. "I do," Zafira confirmed simply. "My assignment to the Liberty was temporary. My permanent command is the Sentinel." She paused, allowing the information to settle. "Admiral, I understand this situation is difficult. Having an officer you believe to be junior suddenly revealed as something else entirely challenges the command structure you're accustomed to. But Operation Blindspot has identified critical vulnerabilities that must be addressed before the Liberty deploys." The Admiral studied her for a long moment, professional assessment replacing personal affront. "You could have revealed your identity at any point. Why maintain the cover when critical systems were at risk?" "Because the test wasn't just about identifying technical vulnerabilities," Zafira explained. "It was about assessing how those vulnerabilities intersect with human factors, bias, hierarchy, institutional inertia. If I had revealed my actual rank and position, the response would have been immediate compliance rather than genuine evaluation." She leaned forward slightly. "Admiral, when you dismissed me this morning, you stated that I was undermining crew confidence by identifying problems. That perspective, that acknowledging vulnerabilities creates weakness rather than addressing it, represents exactly the kind of thinking hostile intelligence services exploit." The truth of her words struck with undeniable force. Hargrove had indeed prioritized hierarchical authority over technical merit, dismissing warnings because of their source rather than their substance. "What happens now?" he asked, professional enough to acknowledge the reality rather than defend against it. "The Secretary of the Navy has authorized full implementation of the Revelation Protocol," Zafira answered. "In practical terms, that means three things. First, all vulnerabilities I identified will be addressed immediately, with technical teams already en route to assist. Second, your officers will receive specialized training in recognizing and countering infiltration techniques. And third," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "a formal acknowledgement of Operation Blindspot's findings will be required." Commander Rayburn frowned. Meaning, Zafira clarified, "that Admiral Hargrove will need to personally reinstate my credentials, symbolically acknowledging that the dismissal was an error, and publicly brief the senior staff on the operation and its findings." Hargrove stiffened slightly but nodded. "The same deck where you were dismissed." "Precisely," Zafira confirmed. "The symbolic value shouldn't be underestimated. This isn't about personal vindication, Admiral. It's about demonstrating to your crew that security concerns transcend rank and background, that being right matters more than who's right." The briefing continued for another hour, covering the technical details of each vulnerability and the necessary remediation steps. Throughout, Zafira maintained the same professional demeanor that had characterized her time aboard the Liberty, though now unburdened by the need to appear deferential. Her mastery of the subject matter was comprehensive, her recommendations precise. As the meeting concluded, Admiral Hargrove made a decision that reflected both his professional integrity and his recognition of the larger mission. "Captain Van, I would like to invite you to tour the Liberty with me, not as a subordinate, but as a visiting captain. I believe seeing you in your true capacity will send an important message to my officers about assumptions and judgment." Zafira considered the offer, recognizing it as both an olive branch and a strategic move to regain control of the narrative. "I accept, Admiral, though I suggest we include Lieutenant Adair in the tour. He was one of the few officers who consistently evaluated my technical input on its merits rather than its source." "Agreed," Hargrove said, surprising both himself and others with his ready acceptance. The chastening experience had triggered a recalibration of his leadership approach, exactly as Operation Blindspot had been designed to accomplish. The tour proceeded through key areas of the carrier, creating a visual counterpoint to Zephyra's earlier departure. Where she had walked in silence under marine escort, she now moved with the natural authority of her true rank, discussing technical matters as an equal with the admiral. The transformation was not lost on the crew, who watched with a mixture of confusion and dawning respect. In the engineering spaces, Zephyra demonstrated her intimate knowledge of the carrier's systems, explaining to Hargrove exactly how the vulnerabilities she had identified could be exploited. Her expertise was undeniable, her recommendations practical and immediate. The most concerning aspect, she explained as they examined the electromagnetic launch system, isn't just the technical flaw itself. It's how easily it was dismissed because it came from someone perceived as just the mechanic. Admiral Hargrove nodded, absorbing both the critique and its implications. A blind spot created by our own prejudices and assumptions. Precisely why the operation bears that name, Zephyra confirmed. Naval intelligence concluded that our greatest vulnerabilities aren't just technical, they're perceptual. We dismiss threats that don't fit our expectations. We overlook capabilities that appear in unexpected packages. Lieutenant Adair, who had joined them as requested, had been listening intently. "Permission to speak freely, Captain." "Granted," Zephyra replied. "When you predicted the hydraulic failure before the instruments showed any anomalies, that wasn't luck or guesswork, was it? You have specialized training beyond standard engineering." She smiled slightly. "Advanced quantum field diagnostics. It's a deep operations specialty, reading minute energetic disturbances before they manifest as mechanical failures. The technology is still classified, but it's remarkably effective for preventative maintenance." Adair absorbed this with evident fascination. "And your actual background, if you're permitted to say?" "Dual doctorates in quantum mechanics and materials science from MIT, followed by specialized training at the Naval Postgraduate School's Classified Warfare Integration Program," she replied. "Before commanding Sentinel, I led the technical development team for the stealth systems it employs." The young officer looked suitably impressed. "No wonder you spotted issues our standard protocols missed." "Which is exactly the point," Admiral Hargrove interjected, showing that the lesson had not been lost on him. "Expertise comes in many forms, and our failure to recognize it, regardless of its source, creates operational vulnerabilities." Their tour eventually brought them to the flight deck, where the massive expanse of the carrier stretched before them. The USS Sentinel remained surfaced nearby, its black hull a stark contrast to the gray of the Liberty. Both vessels represented the pinnacle of American naval power. One conventional and visible, the other revolutionary and previously hidden. Admiral Hargrove had arranged for the senior staff to assemble, creating the stage for the formal acknowledgement required by the Revelation Protocol. The symbolism was inescapable. The same deck where Zephyra had been dismissed would now witness her recognition. The officers gathered in formation, uncertainty evident in their expressions. Commander Rayburn stood among them, his earlier confidence replaced by visible discomfort. Captain Mercer maintained his professional demeanor, though his eyes reflected newfound respect as he observed Zephyra in her true capacity. Hargrove addressed the assembled officers directly. 6 hours ago, I stood on this deck and relieved Lieutenant Commander Van of duty. I questioned her loyalty, her judgment, and her place aboard this vessel." His voice carried, clearly across the deck. "I was wrong." The admission hung in the air, powerful in its simplicity and rarity from a flag officer. Captain Van was aboard the Liberty as part of Operation Blindspot, a naval intelligence program designed to test carrier vulnerabilities, both technical and perceptual. Her recommendations, which many of us dismissed, identified 17 critical security gaps that could have compromised this vessel in combat conditions. He turned to Zephyra, who stood at parade rest beside him. "Captain Van commands the USS Sentinel, the Navy's most advanced submarine and the flagship of Deep Operations Command. Her mission aboard Liberty was to evaluate our security from within, to identify vulnerabilities that our enemies could exploit." The assembled officers absorbed this information with varying degrees of surprise and realization. Many glanced toward the sleek submarine, visible off the carrier's port side, its advanced design now contextualized by the revelation of its commander's identity. Hargrove continued, Captain Van will brief the senior staff on her findings, and specialized teams are en route to implement her recommended security enhancements. I expect full cooperation at every level." He paused, then added with unmistakable emphasis, "And I expect every officer under my command to evaluate information based on its technical merit, not on preconceptions about its source." The message was clear. Bias and prejudice would no longer be tolerated when they interfered with operational security. The Admiral's public acknowledgement of his error set a powerful example that few would miss. As the formal address concluded, Zafira approached Commander Rayburn, who had maintained a careful distance. "Commander," she said, her tone professional rather than triumphant, "I'll need your assistance coordinating the security enhancements for the electronic warfare systems. Your expertise will be valuable in the implementation phase." The olive branch was deliberate, offering him a path to redemption through competent service rather than dwelling on his earlier dismissiveness. After a moment's hesitation, Rayburn nodded. "Of course, Captain. I'll assemble my team immediately." "Thank you, Commander," she replied simply, before moving on to speak with Captain Mercer about engineering priorities. Later that afternoon, Zafira invited select officers, including Lieutenant Adair and, deliberately, Commander Rayburn, aboard the Sentinel for a limited tour. The submarine's interior revealed technological marvels beyond conventional naval architecture. Advanced propulsion systems, revolutionary sonar arrays, and weapons platforms that existed only in theoretical papers for most naval officers. The command center particularly impressed the visitors. A seamless integration of artificial intelligence systems and human operators, designed for unprecedented situational awareness and tactical response. Zafira moved through the space. With natural authority, her crew's respect evident in every interaction. "This technology," Adair asked, gesturing to the specialized displays, "how long has it been operational?" "The Sentinel program has been in development for 12 years, Zafira explained. "This vessel was commissioned 3 years ago, though its existence remains classified above top secret." Commander Rayburn studied the systems with professional interest, his earlier antagonism giving way to genuine appreciation. "And this is just the first of its class?" "The lead vessel," Zafira confirmed. 3 more are currently under construction. Together, they'll form the backbone of our next-generation undersea deterrent capability. As the tour concluded, Rayburn found himself alone with Zafira for a moment. He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Captain, I feel I owe you an apology. My behavior aboard the Liberty was—" "Exactly what Operation Blindspot was designed to assess," she interrupted, neither accepting nor rejecting his apology. "Your responses weren't personal, Commander. They were institutional, reflective of patterns we're working to identify and correct throughout the Navy." He considered this perspective. "Still, I dismissed valid security concerns because of who raised them, not what they contained. That's a failure of judgment I need to address." Zafira nodded, acknowledging his self-awareness. "Then use this experience constructively? When the next mechanic raises a concern that doesn't fit your expectations, remember today." "I will," he promised, and she believed him. Sometimes the most effective lessons came from the most uncomfortable experiences. As the Liberty officers returned to their carrier, Zafira stood on the conning tower of the Sentinel, watching them depart. The mission had accomplished its primary objectives, identifying critical vulnerabilities while demonstrating how easily expertise could be overlooked when it came from unexpected sources. Admiral Hargrove joined her on the flight deck as evening approached, the setting sun casting long shadows across both vessels. "Your submarine will be departing soon?" he asked. "At dawn," she confirmed. "Deep Operations Command has new assignments for us once the security enhancements here are underway." "More carriers to evaluate?" he asked with a hint of wry understanding. "Among other missions," she replied diplomatically. Hargrove nodded, gazing out at the Sentinel. "It's remarkable technology. But what struck me most today wasn't the submarine itself, but what it represents." "Which is," Zafira prompted. "That our most powerful weapons are often hidden in plain sight," he answered. "Just as you were hidden among my crew, your capabilities disguised by our assumptions." He turned to face her directly. "That's the real lesson of Operation Blindspot, isn't it? Not just identifying technical vulnerabilities, but recognizing how our perceptions create them." "Precisely, Admiral," she acknowledged. The most dangerous gaps in our security aren't in our systems, they're in our thinking. The next morning, as dawn broke over the horizon, the USS Sentinel prepared to return to the depths. The carrier crew lined the deck in a spontaneous show of respect that would have been unimaginable just 24 hours earlier. Zephyra stood once more atop the conning tower, her posture military perfect as she returned their salute. No words were exchanged in that moment. None were necessary. The image alone conveyed everything. A woman once dismissed as just a mechanic, now revealed as the commander of the Navy's most advanced vessel, departing with dignity, while those who had underestimated her acknowledged their error through this simple gesture of respect. Admiral Hargrove watched from the bridge as the submarine began its graceful descent beneath the waves. The water embraced the sleek black hull, gradually obscuring its form until only ripples remained to mark its presence. Within minutes, even those disappeared, leaving the ocean surface calm and unbroken, as if the Sentinel had never been there at all. Yet its impact would endure long after its physical presence vanished. New protocols were already being implemented throughout the carrier, addressing each vulnerability Zephyra had identified. More significantly, a subtle but profound shift had occurred in the Liberty's command culture. A new awareness that expertise and insight could come from unexpected sources, and that dismissing them based on preconceptions created dangers far beyond wounded pride. 6 months later, the USS Liberty deployed with these new VAN protocols fully integrated into its operations. Admiral Hargrove had been reassigned to Naval Intelligence, where his first-hand experience with Operation Blindspot made him an effective advocate for its expansion. Commander Rayburn, perhaps most transformed by the experience, now led training sessions on cognitive bias in security operations. When a young female lieutenant faced skepticism during one such session, Rayburn silenced it immediately. "Judge her work, not your assumptions," he instructed the doubtful officer. "That's how we lost Captain Van, and nearly compromised this carrier in the process." Miles beneath the surface, in waters half a world away, the USS Sentinel glided silently through the darkness. On the command deck, Captain Zephyra Van reviewed incoming data with the same methodical precision that had characterized her work aboard the Liberty. A communication arrived from Deep Operations Command. Another carrier had dismissed another mechanic whose warnings about security vulnerabilities had proven too uncomfortable to acknowledge. Zephyra gave a single nod to her executive officer. "Prepare to surface, Commander Linares. It seems another admiral requires a demonstration of what hides beneath the waves." As the submarine began its ascent, she allowed herself a brief, satisfied smile. The ocean depths had always held secrets, powerful currents moving silently, changing the course of waters above without visible disturbance. True naval power operated on the same principle, not always seen, but forever shaping what happened on the surface. Have you ever witnessed someone reveal their true capabilities after being underestimated? That moment when hidden expertise finally emerges can change everything. Share your story of unexpected revelation in the comments below, and subscribe for more tales of extraordinary people hiding in plain sight.